Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Lindsay and Ziggy. Hi, girls. Thank you for coming to meet me today. You guys have a podcast called Mum, Body, Soul. Congratulations.
Thank
I
you.
love it. You've just started and it's going really well. Tell me, how did you decide to do a podcast?
Well, Ziggy was my personal trainer. And then when I became pregnant, Lindsay took me through the calm birth school method that she teaches, hypnobirthing.
So we'd been doing these things together, exercising together, training together, and we could not stop talking to each other. I was more focused on pre and postnatal yoga at the time. And then I moved into this hypnobirthing and she was focused on mums and bubs and pre and postnatal fitness. And there was just so much to talk about. And Ziggy said to me, we should have a podcast. We just loved talking to each other anyway. And I said, yeah, we should. And that was it.
That kind of was it. And I think if you put something out there into the ether, it manifests and it happens. And I'm just really glad that I'm doing it with Lindsay, because if I had tried to do it on my own, I don't think it would have gotten done.
No, it needed to be both of us. I'm really grateful for the partnership. But from the point when we said, let's do it, to the point when we were actually launched was about a month.
Yeah, it happened very quickly. And again, I think that's because we had each other. We've both worked in the pre and postnatal wellness industry for like just under 10 years. That makes me feel old.
I know. I'm not, I'm about 12.
Yeah.
You both look about 18.
And so it was just a case of we wanted to share everything that we talked about and everything that we knew and all of the health professionals we work with and sharing mother stories on a grander scale.
How has it been received? Is it going well? Are you getting great feedback?
Fucking fabulous.
That's great.
We're so over the moon. I'm actually constantly delighted and surprised by the messages that I receive. We keep asking our friends and family and listeners for feedback because we just want to get better and we just want to grow. But the feedback has only been really positive, which has been blowing my mind, honestly. And, we both shared quite personal stories. And there's a little bit of vulnerability with sharing your personal story. And you think, what are people going to say? But people have come back and said, you've helped me. I wish I had this when I was pregnant. I can't believe I didn't know this. Thank you for sharing this or giving tips. Or
isn't that great?
Especially with
so
your
happy.
episode. So episode 1, we started with Lindsay and her fertility journey. I mean, you hadn't shared it so deeply.
Not even to my best friend had I really gone that deep with the story.
It was such a powerful episode. I cried in that episode.
Oh.
I did.
I don't think anyone can listen to it without.
Yeah, I did. I did cry. I was like, you buggers. Oh my God.
I always feel a little bit guilty about that, but also secretly pleased that people can connect with me on that level.
No, don't feel guilty at all. It is about connecting. And I think as a podcaster, that's what you've got to do is you've got to share parts of yourself so that you connect with your audience. Like my listeners know I'm single and in menopause and they know everything about me really. And I think that really gets people coming back and wanting to know more. And also it's a part of sharing your story, owning your story so that other people feel more comfortable talking about their disappointments or traumas or shame or whatever it is.
Exactly. And I didn't feel like we could go forward without everybody knowing the whole truth about me. It was actually for me also a powerful moment in my life to really put everything down and just say, this is it.
Well, the amount of people who came back saying, I had a loss and this woke me up to it and got me on my healing journey, or I didn't know that you could have a loss after 12 weeks, or
so many things. There were so many different connections that we received. If that was all that we got from it, that was already enough. So we're super pleased that we keep connecting with more and more amazing people, just such super interesting people. Yeah, it's great for both of us.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yes.
So, Lindsay, could you share your story with us now?
Sure.
Okay. Just so my listeners have an understanding, and they can obviously go and listen to the Mum Body Soul podcast in more detail, and I'll put the links in the show notes. But I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey, and then we'll hear about Ziggy's as well.
Absolutely. So I had been trying to get pregnant when I was around like 35. So I was a little bit of an older, going on the journey a little bit older than some people. And especially in Hong Kong, they treat that as a geriatric pregnancy is what they call it, which is a terrible term, but that's what they call it. And so I had kind of been more, I guess, on high alert. I've been deemed more high risk. And so they were monitoring me a little bit closer. And I got pregnant the first time after this test called the HSG test, which basically clears out your fallopian tubes and makes potentially the next pregnancy more sticky. And I actually got pregnant the next time after that test. And that was my first pregnancy. The whole pregnancy didn't feel quite right to me. And ultimately, around 16 weeks pregnant, 4 months pregnant, they found out there was an issue with the baby, a genetic issue that was causing the baby not to form major organs. The heart was not growing. The brain had stopped growing properly. There was no diaphragm in the baby and multiple other red flags. And I was told immediately on the spot at this scan that this pregnancy is not going to go forward. And so they suggested I proceed with giving birth to that baby basically that day.
How was that to receive that news?
I say this in the episode as well. It's going to sound a little bit odd. It was relieving because the second that I was pregnant something wasn't quite right. And I'm a very intuitive, if you know me, I'm an incredibly intuitive person. I often get feelings about things in my life. And the whole time I was very on edge. I'm also a very positive and happy person. And I was like feeling really aggressive towards my doctor and like just really on edge constantly, like in that fight or flight kind of adrenaline mode all the time. And that was not my character. So when I was told there was, obviously I also was devastated, but I was also relieved that I wasn't wrong in this situation. But it was also one of the worst moments for sure of my life to hear that news. It was devastating as well. And seeing my partner have that level of sadness really broke my heart as well. That was hard.
Yeah, that would have been really hard because he wouldn't have necessarily had those same feelings that something wasn't quite right that you had.
No, and I didn't tell him. And I'm very open. So that was kind of odd too. I didn't tell him I had this intuition either. Didn't want to let him down. It was our first baby. We were really excited, but it was hard.
And you'd always known that you were going to have a girl.
Yes. So part of the intuition is that I'd always known that my first baby was going to be a girl. And when I found out it was a boy, I was very confused. And it just sort of added up to something's not right. And it wasn't that I didn't want a boy. It was like I had already had the vision of having a girl as my first baby. So it really kind of
threw you. Yeah. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And then how did you deal with that loss and the grief that was associated with losing your baby at 16 weeks?
So immediately after I had the baby, I reached out to a therapist. I went online and I found this lady and I just messaged her. I was supposed to fly out of Hong Kong like a day or two later for Christmas. And she was like, yeah, you can come in today and see me. And I just went straight in and I talked to her. And I'd never done therapy before, but I just knew I could not handle this on my own. It was bigger than me. And I just knew that there was no way I was going to go forward without external help. I'm still so incredibly grateful to her for helping me through that. And she also recommended me to an energy healer who I saw the next day. And she gave me this beautiful massage and healed me in a physical way. And obviously the healing took a long time, but that was a really great way to move me into the right direction and to know they also normalized a lot of the feelings for me. Like, other women have been through this. You're not the only person who feels this level of sadness or has been through a loss like this. So normalizing having that, even my therapist knew some women with this condition. She'd heard of it before, and that made me feel not alone.
So was that helpful to hear that?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah, that's interesting, because you wonder whether sometimes by saying that, you're minimizing somebody else's grief or loss.
No, not at all. In fact, so one of my friends always says this saying, you've got to see me to be me. It's all about representation. So if you can't identify yourself in someone else's story and you just feel really lonely, you feel alone, like no one else is going through this, no one else is feeling this. When someone says, actually, you're not the only one, it was still hard because most people have been through more of an early miscarriage. A lot of people who are coming to me having miscarriages before 12 weeks.
Where you may just have bleeding, or it could be what they call a DNC, a dilation and cuttridge, where they just take...
Curette. DNC, dilation and curette, isn't it?
Sorry.
Yeah, cutteridge. What's that? That's not a word.
And that is also a very challenging situation in its own right. And I actually did go on to have that experience. But this experience that I had to give birth to this baby. So it was a bit different. And I would have people coming up to me saying, oh, so-and-so's had a miscarriage too. My sister's had a miscarriage. My cousin had a miscarriage. And I was thinking, I didn't have a miscarriage. I had to birth a baby. That's not in the episode. But, one night I was out, I'd lost the baby, out with my girlfriends. And this woman came into this bar where I was with my girlfriends. And she had obviously been on a big night, had a few drinks. And she came in and said, isn't birth amazing? Women, aren't we amazing? And it was like, she was off, like just, going around the circle going, have you given birth? Have you given birth? And it was honestly like a bomb was going off as she was pointing to each person. I was thinking, she's coming for me. And I must have looked like I was literally about to pass out because I was waiting for her to come, because the answer was yes, but I didn't have a baby. And that was really hard. And I just felt this hand come under the table, and my friend just grabbed my hand and held my hand. And I just turned away and burst into tears. And she pulled me out of that bar so fast. And I said, and this must have been like 8 months after I'd had this baby. And I said, I'm really sorry. I feel like I'm not over this. And I'm really sorry. I feel like I'm bringing you guys down. And she said, you're not. You're going through this. We're here for you. We're here for you as long as it takes. So whether that's like 1 year, 2 years. So I think I'd been suppressing it a little bit because I felt like, well, first couple weeks, yes, you're sad. Maybe a month or two, you're sad. But 8 months in, I was still hurting a lot. But my friends were there to uplift me and help me through that. So support in whichever way you see that. It's everything.
It's so important.
Really everything.
And in a way, you kind of feel like you don't deserve that time to grieve.
Exactly.
And there's a sort of a hidden pressure to move on.
Yes.
And get it together. And people should be allowed to grieve for as long as they need.
It takes as long as it takes.
Yeah, exactly. Can you describe what grief feels like to you?
I always describe it as, and a good friend of mine sent me a poem about it, but that grief is like waves. And I really resonated with that. It's like it will come and it will peak and you'll feel really awful. And then it slowly goes away a little bit. But then later on it comes and it goes. It's waves that slowly get smaller and smaller and smaller over time. And I felt like that was so accurate. At the beginning, it's so overwhelming. Then slowly those waves get less and further away. For me, it just felt like sad and like I was missing something. And I was missing that baby and that possibility of what could have been. Obviously, when you get pregnant, even though we know you can go through loss. I mean, I'd passed that 12-week mark that everyone holds to this big standard of once you get past that.
Yeah, you're safe.
You're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd really planned this person in my life. We'd named him. We knew it was a boy. But interestingly, I hadn't bought anything. I didn't buy anything. And people were trying to give me stuff and I wouldn't take it.
Wow, that's spooky.
Yeah, I know.
Isn't it?
I have this happens to me all the time in my life.
Yeah.
But I just felt like people would be like, oh, here's this thing. And I'd like, I don't want that right now.
So that's a really, really beautiful explanation of grief. It really resonates. I can really understand it from somebody who hasn't experienced what you have.
Mm.
How do you go about healing? What's the process? How did you get to a place of healing?
Talking. I know that that's not for everybody. So I'm just speaking to my own personal way of healing. But for me, I needed to tell people, this is what I'm feeling. I needed to talk through my feelings with people and share stories with people. And one of the things I think is so super important is you do not have to go through what someone else has gone through to be there for them.
That's huge. That's so
huge.
important. Yeah.
If your friend has cancer, for example, you don't have to have had cancer to be a good friend to that person. But a lot of people were kind of like scared to interact with me. They didn't know what to say to me because they're like, well, I've not been through that.
People are afraid of saying the wrong thing or upsetting you. And in actual fact, you don't have to say anything. You can just be there and listen. And that's part of the healing process and being a good friend.
Yeah, exactly. And also to say, and we're very big on this, Ziggy and I are very big on holding your hands up and saying, I don't know what to say. That's perfectly fine. I'm not expecting everyone to be an expert on what I went through because actually it's an extremely rare case. So how is anyone ever going to know about it? But it's okay to say, what do you need? Can I help you? Are you okay? I don't really know what else to say. That's okay. And so I did find myself in that period of time because I was so sad and sensitive to things like pregnancy and things. I was very reactive internally, not externally. But, you know, when people would say something to me, it would really hurt if they were careless with their words. But it was a growing and learning experience for me because now I really think about how I talk to other people who are going through stuff. I really think about it.
And is there anything that you can think of that really was said to you that you wish you would recommend people don't say to others? Like, could I guess a few things?
Yeah, please guess and I'll tell you.
Like, oh, don't worry, you'll be able to have more children, or at least you know you can get pregnant.
Yeah.
Is that one of them? Was that unhelpful?
Unhelpful.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, nobody knows the answer to that, really.
Mm. And it's taking the focus off your actual loss.
That's it.
Isn't it?
It's kind of like when people say the expression, at least, to anything.
Mm.
Well, we're going through this really difficult time, but at least you have this. I don't believe in that. I always say to my friends, stop. I don't need you to balance every negative with a positive. I really feel strongly that people should live in their feelings. So if you feel really sad or angry about something, totally fine. You don't need to justify that by saying that you were really grateful for everything in your life.
And good on you for saying that to them. You know, that takes courage to address it and help people find the right path with their support. But it's a helpful thing to do.
I don't know if I said it at first, always, when I was in that deep level of grief. It was over time.
Yeah.
Through work with my therapist, through energy healing, through talking through friends and growing myself from that experience. But I actually am incredibly grateful. This will also sound crazy to some people, but I am grateful for that challenge in my life because it's helped me to connect deeper and look at things differently and be better and stronger. Yeah, I feel like that's really beneficial. Other things that people said, just telling stories about people that I don't know.
Oh, yeah, my friend had this happen and yeah.
Well, that doesn't mean anything. One woman told me that's just genetics for you.
Oh, thanks.
You know, that's just the way. Nothing you can do about it. And I was like, well, it's not helpful.
Yeah.
But I know ultimately also, though, that people mean well.
Yeah, it does come from a place of caring, but people sometimes just don't quite know what to say.
Yeah. And I'm not perfect. So I always reflect on this. I want my friends to correct me if I misstep because I know I'm not perfect either. So over time, I began to look back on those things and change my viewpoint and think, well, I'm going to let that go because everyone's learning, everyone's growing.
Lifelong learning, we're all doing it
We
all
are
the time.
all doing it.
Always. And we will never stop.
It's just that, I guess, one of the things I learned from therapy was if people are not being helpful in your current situation, it's okay to give them space in your life and then weave them back in as and when you're ready. And that was a big lesson for me because I'm such a connected person. I love my friends. I want to keep them all like really close to me. But it was okay to step away from some people and draw myself closer to the people who could communicate with me.
That's really good.
Yeah.
That's really, I think, very helpful to hear. So did you have any fears when embarking on your next pregnancy based on your first experience?
Again, probably will surprise people. No.
Oh, see, that's down to the old intuition, isn't it? Yeah.
I had the second miscarriage where I'd given myself a break. I got pregnant again and I changed doctors because I needed a sort of fresh start. And she was really confident, my doctor, in my second pregnancy too. It caught everybody by surprise. And I remember actually I was teaching a yoga class. I was going in, setting up the studio, and I went to the bathroom and there was blood. And I came back out and said, there was only one student there. And I was like, I need to go. I didn't tell her, but she saw my face and she said, is everything okay? And I said, I think I'm having a miscarriage. And she knew my previous story and she just gave me a big hug. It was actually a special moment. She's like, I'll take care of everything. I'll close the studio. It's fine. And I left. And the funny part about it was my husband was on his way home with this massive painting that we had purchased. And I just remember this moment of turning up to the doctor's office thinking I'm having this miscarriage. And my husband turns up with the world's largest painting.
That's very surreal. Yeah.
Right? And it was very comical because he couldn't get through like the doorway properly with it and like it was ridiculous. But that happened. I was a bit taken aback by it, but I moved on again. I did think, I can't believe this is happening, but I moved on from it. And when I was ready, I think it took another 6 months. I tried again and got pregnant with my daughter and I had bleeding again.
Oh, so you did miscarry that first
So I had the second time I miscarried completely. And then I got pregnant again the third time.
Oh, right.
Which is interesting because 3 is a very special connected number for me in my life. Everything is always 3. My whole family, like we're multiples of 3 years apart, like the entire family. It's just a special number for me. And so I got pregnant the third time. And I felt from the beginning it was going to be okay. And it was a girl, but I had this bleeding. My doctor was away and I went and saw another doctor and she said, you're having a threatened miscarriage? And I remember thinking, that sounds scary. All I heard was the word miscarriage, right? I didn't know what threatened miscarriage was. And I went home that night and thought, oh my God, it's happening again. And it was a horrible night and I couldn't obviously sleep. And I thought, I'm losing this baby. And the next day I went in and she was like, oh, but it's fine. And she sort of explained what a threatened miscarriage was. She's like, it's just bleeding around the sac, but there's nothing wrong with the baby. I was like, well, yesterday you scared the life out of me and today everything is fine. But basically from that moment on, I didn't worry for a second.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I always knew that everything was going to be fine. Even the birth, I felt very confident the entire way, very at peace in that pregnancy. It was day and night for my first pregnancy.
Did you start your hypnobirthing in your pregnancy with Liv?
No. So I read the book just before I gave birth to Liv, and I really resonated with it and thought, I need to teach this. So I emailed them. And I signed on to the course, but the course didn't start till January. I had Liv in December. So I signed up to start the course when she was a newborn, essentially. I hadn't trained in hypnobirthing, even though I'd been interested in it. And it really connects with what I did as a pre and postnatal yoga teacher. But I went in without all the knowledge that I have now, actually.
Wow,
You rocked
interesting.
it.
And you still rocked it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I felt really confident. So no fear.
Thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. That's really amazing. And Ziggy, can we hear your story, please? Let's hear your first baby story.
I think I've shared on your podcast. I think I had a whole episode dedicated
I think
to
you
me on your
did, but
podcast.
not everyone listens to every single one. Could you go back and listen to every single one, please, guys?
Please. So I became pregnant at 23 with my first, and he was a total accident. No, he wasn't. He was a surprise, a gift from the divine. I met my partner, and then a few months later, we were pregnant, not married, none of that stuff. And I just knew, like, the second I found out that I was going to have this baby, I was like, he's mine. Because termination was still a conversation at that point. My partner and I hadn't known each other that long. We weren't married. So there's all these other factors. We weren't living together. And I'm really glad that he stepped up because a lot of other men wouldn't. And we had that baby. I had a pretty bizarre time with my family. I ended up becoming estranged from my parents, which was really heartbreaking. And again, Dan just stepped up and my friends stepped up and I had the support and community around me. I wish my family had been more on board during the pregnancy. It's a hard thing to go through the hormones, but also not have the people who you think love you the most around.
It would be really hard, I think.
Yeah.
Especially when you're so young as well.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because my sister had a baby at 21. And so I didn't think I was that young. I knew I was. None of my friends had kids, but I knew I could do it. She was such an inspiration and she did it with all such grace. And she was such a great mom. So I knew if there was anyone to turn to, it was going to be her. Flash forward to my birth. I too did a form of hypnobirthing called the Makant method. And I really wanted a all-natural vaginal delivery, little medical intervention as possible. And long story short, I just had a very long labor, was very tired, but I did manage to birth vaginally. And then I had this awesome experience after with my baby of a couple of hours of skin to skin, just chilling. And then when we went back home 3 days later, reality sort of kicked in and I started feeling extremely anxious very early on. Breastfeeding was a huge challenge and I was just so tired. There was no one there helping me. I just thought it was going to be really easy. I just thought it was your life plus a baby and didn't take into the fact that I wouldn't be able to cook or eat or shower or sleep or do anything that I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. Add to that the physical change and the physical trauma that the body has been through after birth. It was all a really big shock. And then the people who were coming to visit me were a bunch of 20-year-olds who didn't know anything about postpartum. So they weren't showing up with like food and water and drinks. They just wanted to see a cute newborn baby. And now, after having a second child, I can say to people, this is what I need in my postpartum. And if you aren't going to come with any of that stuff, please don't come.
Oh, good on you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's taken a while, but that's great advice for anyone. You know, if there are people that you don't want to come see you after you give birth, or if you don't want certain people there at your birth, like you are totally in the right.
And also, if you don't want people holding your baby, don't let them hold your baby. People come in, they want to kiss your baby, hold your baby. It's like, no, if you don't want them to, don't let them.
That was a huge thing for me too. I was very protective over my son and I really just felt like only I could do everything. And that as well added to, I think, the anxiety and the depression and the stress and all the pressure I put on myself of having to try and do everything. And it really is okay just to ask for help. And people were more than happy to help. I just had to let them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you recognize that you had postpartum depression?
No, I thought it was the baby blues. And someone actually said to me that I might have it. A friend's mom, she suggested it. And I had gone for one of the checkups at the MCHC, the Maternal Child Health Clinic, where you go for all your appointments. And I had scored pretty highly on that depression questionnaire, but they never really pressed it because I said, it's fine. I don't need it. I don't need to speak to a psychologist. And I guess I kind of swept it under the rug. And it just kept getting bigger and manifesting more. And it put a real strain on our relationship postpartum. I don't think people talk enough about their marriage or their relationship with their partner after a new baby arrives because everyone is sleep deprived. Mom's hormones are all over the shop trying to find homeostasis and balance again. And it does put a lot of pressure on a relationship, especially if you haven't been having sex for a period of time. And then you go into postpartum, or I went into postpartum body and I looked down and didn't know what I was looking at and had this real identity shift. No way do I want someone touching my body at that point. So sometimes when I hear stories about people, you know, announcing second pregnancies like 2 or 3 months after their first is born, I'm like, what are you guys doing? How have you found time for sex?
Yeah.
Slightly jealous, but also no.
So when did you recognize then that you had postpartum depression? How many months old was your baby?
Oh, it's all foggy now. But I never really had the lightness. And I think the first time I'd properly admitted that I'd had depression and anxiety was maybe he was around 4 or 5 months. I was on a hike with friends and other mummy baby friends. And I said, I think I'm still going through it. And saying it didn't give it as much power and it didn't make it as shameful. And it was really relief to admit it to people and for them to still accept me. Because previously, before baby, I'm this super positive, you can get through anything kind of happy-go-lucky person. And then feeling that low at this time that's supposed to be so joyous, that was hard to admit. And I'm so glad I did it because the more I've said it and the more I've talked about it, the less taboo it's been.
Yeah. And it's also really wonderful that you're talking about it to help other people who might be in a similar situation and recognize that it's out of your control and there are ways that you can get help and support, and what would you recommend for help and support? What did you do?
I exercised because that for me is my biggest release and I love the endorphins. I think I said this on the podcast too, but exercise makes you happy and happy people just don't kill their husbands. That is a quote from Elle Woods, Legally Blonde.
I love it.
That's brilliant.
And it's hard right now. We're talking right now and we're in the midst of Hong Kong's third wave of COVID. It's difficult for people to go outside. There's an extra level of anxiety that's around to do with germs and etc. But there are also restrictions on how you can go outside, so it's difficult to get out in nature. But I found getting out in nature, getting some fresh air, just not being confined to the four walls of our living room really helped. I hike every weekend. We had a dog. Going out for walks with that dog every day with the baby was so essential for me to get my body moving again, to be out of my house and back into reality, and then just talking to people about it. And also realizing that some of the normal experiences that we were going through weren't just isolated to depressive, anxious feelings. Other mothers were feeling them too. And that was okay. And actually, it is normal. And it is common to not want people to touch your baby or to get stressed out when you haven't had a lot of sleep.
Yeah, or to cry.
Yeah. And then having had a second child, this time I knew what support I needed to have in place. I knew that I wanted someone cooking and cleaning for me and so that I could just sit there with my baby and feed my baby. I had my mom come so that she could be around to help with the toddler or to help with the baby so I could spend time with the toddler. Because it's a transition when you have a second child come into the home.
Were you able to avoid postpartum depression with your second one, do you think?
Yes. Yes and no. You already have higher chances of developing it again if you've had it once before.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's
yes.
interesting.
Or if you've had a mental health condition previously in your life, or if your mother has had it.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There's a predisposition to it. I didn't have. It was like night and day. The first time, it was very deep, dark feelings, inconsolable, uncontrollable crying. Second time round, I just felt confident that I knew what was happening. And I didn't feel, I had periods of blue, like I would cry, and I was kind of mourning the relationship that I had just with my son. And then now I have a second son. But this time round, a lot of it slipped into rage and into anger and frustration with the people around my support system, just not doing what I needed them to do when I needed it done,
Not being psychic enough.
Right? Like, how dare you? And that flagged up something in me that Lindsay and I talk about a lot is conscious parenting. And it flagged up that I'm trying to control my toddler or I'm trying to control my husband or whoever it is in the household, our helper, so that I can have things my way, which is not healthy. Everyone is their own human entity and I shouldn't be controlling them.
Yeah, that's true. And how do you feel that the postpartum depression or the way that you felt impacted your parenting, or did it impact your parenting?
So the first time round, luckily, my baby was a baby. And when I was with him, and bonding with him, there wasn't an impact. I'm very lucky in that way. Like I felt very connected to him
See, that's really good because a lot of people with postpartum depression don't necessarily have that bond with their baby, do they? You're lucky you had that.
Yeah. And I think that's also why I didn't think I had the depression, because I loved my child so much. I thought you had to have attachment issues. And that's a common misconception. Second time round, it definitely impacted the way I was parenting because I was just on edge, and it felt, I don't want my son to grow up walking on eggshells around me. But luckily, I've read a lot of books. I work in the pre and postnatal world, and I've got a great friend like Lindsay. And we now have this podcast that I can learn about different parenting techniques, and I can learn about how to manage tantrums and try and implement them as best as I can. And more often than not, it's my tantrums that I've got to sort out, not my toddlers.
That's so cute. So what about your relationship? Did it impact your relationship negatively?
The first time round, absolutely. And the thing is, I kind of think about mine and Dan's situation as kind of being like an arranged marriage. We were getting to know each other.
And you were thrown in at the deep end by the pregnancy.
A regular relationship gets put under a lot of pressure. And if you have any cracks, puts so much strain.
It's so true.
It's really true.
Yeah.
So I've seen the strongest of relationships get really tested. So when you're such a new couple, that must have been.
It wasn't. I think it was about 1 year, 18-month point where I had a conversation with someone and they were just like, I think you got to lower your expectations a little. And I was like, me? Oh, actually, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Sometimes those having the truth just thrown at you can be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, that's where resentments come from. It's me expecting someone to be a certain way when they're not at my expectation, which kind of leads to the controlling thing too. And then I'm trying to control them to match my expectation. And everyone just ends up aggravated.
What advice would you have for anybody suffering from postpartum depression?
Get professional help. If you can, just get professional help. We recently had Dr. Tess Brown on our podcast, who she specializes in trauma and her interest is mainly in pre and postnatal. And she said, if you can't afford a batch of sessions, just tell that therapist, be upfront and say, I can only afford this session, but could you give me some tools to help me? Some techniques that can help me when I'm in the midst of rage or when I'm in the midst of a depressive episode.
Because I think you said you didn't get professional help because you couldn't afford it the first time. Is that right?
Yeah. That's correct. We couldn't afford it. And I didn't think that my mental health was worth the money that could go towards baby stuff or groceries or bills.
Which is a really normal way to think. When you have any sort of mental health issue, you feel like you're not deserving of the support that you need. And that's something that you've got to push through and fight against and still get that support. It's really, really important.
Absolutely. And actually, maybe if I'd spent a little bit of that money, I would have had more confidence in letting go of a lot of things. And that would have then led me going back to work earlier or whatever it would have been, or trusting other people with my son so that I could go back to work earlier and money wouldn't have then been an issue.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. So we can have great wisdom with hindsight, can't we? Definitely. So what have you learned about yourself through this experience?
That I'm badass. No, but that, I'm a lot stronger than I think I am. And being honest about my feelings is never, ever going to end up in a negative thing, because I really built a community around me after I gave birth to George. I started Mums and Bubs classes, and the mums that I met in that room, and then, the 3 and 4 years after, it built such a large community. What was the question?
What have you learned about yourself through this experience?
That's mom brain right there.
Yeah. She's just had that baby not long ago. So you're talking about bringing a community together, and you've got the ability to do that, which is really lovely.
Yeah, there's that classic saying, it takes a village, and we don't necessarily have the conventional village of the prehistoric days or tribal community. And I built my tribe. I built my community, and I'm grateful for it.
And now you're coming into the podcast tribe, which is so exciting. Welcome.
Expanding the community globally.
And Lindsay, what have you learned about yourself through your experience?
Oh my goodness. I've learned to appreciate other people and see them in such a different light. That everybody has challenges, everybody has struggles, and to really listen to people and be kind when you speak back to them. But also that nobody's perfect and we're all learning. So it's okay if you make mistakes on the path when you're communicating with someone, but it's all about holding your hands up and saying, I'm sorry. I don't know everything, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool. That's lovely. So girls, tell me about your businesses. What are you doing in the mum and baby world at the moment? Lindsay, what are you doing?
Originally, I was doing pre and postnatal yoga, but now I've moved into teaching hypnobirthing and antenatal classes. Yes. And I teach something called the Calm Birth School method. And why I was drawn to that method was I was having a lot of clients come in and say, oh, I did hypnobirthing, but it didn't work. And I was getting really confused about why they were saying it didn't work, because I just thought, isn't this supposed to be a mindset that's just supposed to help you? And then I found the Calm Birth School. And what I loved about it is that it's for all kinds of births. So it helps you navigate if your birth takes a turn that you didn't expect, if you have an emergency C-section, if you're aiming for whatever kind of birth you're aiming for. And I really liked that. So it gives you practical tools, and it connects a lot, obviously, with the mindfulness aspect and the breathing that I was already doing in yoga, but takes it to like the next level. So that is now what I focus on, along with Mom Body Soul with Ziggy.
Oh, that's so cool. And are you doing that like freelance? Do you have a company?
Yep, I have a company. It's called Calm Birth Hong Kong. And I do that it's all my own company. And I go and see couples at their house. And obviously during COVID, we're online as well, operating online in groups, in privates. It's been wonderful. I absolutely love it.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And Ziggy, what about you? What are you doing?
Decluttering my life of businesses.
What, you got too many? Because you had a whole bunch of little things going on, didn't you? You had your mum and baby fitness thing. Is that still going?
So since having my second child and with COVID, I'm no longer comfortable with bringing babies and mothers together in a space. So what I've been doing is teaching online classes, just 30 minutes, whatever a mom can pack into those 30 minutes. I teach a live class, but people can purchase it, recorded after. And it's still just doing one-to-one personal training, predominantly with pre and postnatal women. But my main passion, I guess, is the conversation and the normalization of everything pre and postnatal and motherhood. So my Instagram is kind of my biggest moneymaker, I would say. That's a bit cringy, but I'm an influencer.
Great.
Yeah. And so a lot of the time brands will reach out to me to try their products, review them. And if I like them, I will talk about them a lot.
Oh, that's the thing
so cool.
I think that sets Ziggy apart is like you're an influencer, but you're like genuinely love all the products that you
I won't promote something I don't like.
How does one become an influencer and what does it mean?
I really just fell into it because it all started out with me being authentic about my postpartum experience and my depression. And more people liked following it. More and more people liked seeing my workouts with George, integrating that into my life. And then they really just liked my authenticity. So sometimes people will say to me, oh, how do you get into this? I don't know. I really don't know. Just be you. And I think I manifested it. I said to people, I want this to become profitable and I'd like this to be my day job. Kind of like with the podcast, I said, I'd love to just sit around having conversations all day. And it happened. So just putting your mind to it. But you know what? It's not all that it's cracked up to be. You cannot sustain or pay for your children's school with lotions and potions, and free stuff. It's fantastic. I'm very grateful for it. I get to try some of the coolest products for my kids and myself. But
yeah, you need to have a regular income for motherhood, don't you, and the future.
Yeah. And not everything online is as it seems. I don't spend hours editing or making my Instagram look that pretty. It's very authentic.
How many followers do you have on Instagram?
Right now, about 10.4.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. But the Instagram algorithm keeps changing. So it's very difficult to get clout, organic engagement, and they're constantly changing. So really, it's not something to chase. And you can get very swept up in the likes, the engagement, et cetera, and it takes away from the beauty of connection through Instagram. It's always important, if you do want to live that KOL lifestyle, make sure that it's authentic and you enjoy it.
Oh, brilliant. That's great, though. Good advice. And now I've learnt something new.
You know, and she's a millennial. I always laugh because I'm like, I miss the millennial mark. And I'm like, not as savvy. Not as savvy.
That's so hilarious.
But I mean, all the kids nowadays, they're into TikTok and whatever. It's now banned in Hong Kong.
Oh, I was into TikTok.
Were
oh my
you?
God, I was going down a TikTok rabbit
no sense
hole.
To me, I didn't get it.
Oh, I would just sit and watch it for hours. It was just ridiculous. And I did a few of them.
Did you?
Promoting my podcast and stuff.
Yeah,
and then
get it, Jules.
I was gone. Yeah, I loved it.
I don't know what settings I had it on, but I just kept getting really sexy dances.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot
of it.
Yeah,
we do. Yeah.
I had my 8-year-old nieces teaching me how to TikTok.
Oh, so funny. So what do you both hope for Mum Body Soul podcast?
Abundance.
Great.
Which is monetization.
Yeah, you should be able to get sponsors through your other sort of influencing, shouldn't you?
I don't doubt that we will.
Yeah.
But also, I think my biggest thing is that I want to highlight a lot of people's stories and give a lot of information that isn't necessarily just medical when it comes to pregnancy and postpartum.
Yeah, because it really is about the mum body and soul.
It is. And to learn for ourselves, because we're both in this industry and I want to know as much as possible as well, because honestly, I've been doing this for a long time and you still come across things you've never heard of.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you'll continually be learning.
That's it.
And in my experience, I think motherhood podcasts are very popular. I imagine that you should do really well.
Thanks, Jules.
Yeah.
We are
Thank
successful.
you. We're manifesting it.
I know.
We are successful manifest.
Yeah, we're all successful podcasters. And hopefully you'll be able to join us next year at Hong Kong Podfest if this COVID thing goes away.
I hope it's on. I really hope it's on.
Well, I'm running it, so.
Oh,
yeah.
Please let it be on.
We'll be there.
We were going to do it this year, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it'll happen in October or November. I think we've got to wait till next year and have a big fresh start.
And we'll be there. We'll collect our award. It's okay.
That'd be great. Yeah. It's not an awards night. No, you'll come and do a live podcast.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, you'll do a live 15-minute podcast with a guest, and then we'll probably be running some workshops during the day as well. And we'll have 2 nights, and it will probably be in the Riff, which is an amazing club in California Tower.
Amazing.
Yeah, so yeah, it's going to be fantastic. So we just need things to change with COVID before we can do it.
Yes, I'm also going to manifest that.
Yeah. So, girls, how can my listeners find you if they want to be in touch with you, Lindsay?
I'll let the millennial take this one.
Okay, go. Go, millennial.
If you'd like to connect with us on Instagram, you can hit us up at Mom Body Soul Podcast. If you want to be a guest on our podcast, head to the link in our bio for our application form. Or if you would like to hold ad space, you can email us at mombodysoulpodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, you guys, for coming on my podcast today. It's been a wonderful conversation. I wish you all the best of luck with your podcast.
Thank you.
And now you're part of the Hong Kong Pod Squad, which is really exciting.
Hong Kong Pod
Yeah. You've got to use that hashtag,
yes.
HK Pod Squad.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Get that on your Instagram.
Yes.
Ooh,
Thank you for having us.
One last plug. If you'd like to follow me directly, it's at zig.fitmama. And if you want anything to do with birth, head to Lindsay's
at CalmBirthHK.
Do you want to do yours?
No, that's all right. That's good.
Fantastic. And guys, you give me all of that and I'll put it all in the show notes for everybody.
We will. Absolutely.
For my listener out there, if you have enjoyed this podcast and you would like to share it with your friends and family, please do that. If you could go to iTunes to rate and review us, that would be amazing. It will help Hong Kong Confidential go up the charts, and it will also help people find Ziggy and Lindsay and their podcast. And if you would like to sponsor me on Patreon, then please go over there. And normally I have these questions. I ask my guests to go on Patreon, secret questions, but I don't have them with me. I left them home.
That's okay.
So I can't do it, but we might make it up. All right.
We can do some Mom Body
We can make it up.
I'm going to make it up. Okay. So For as little as $1 a month, you guys, you can hear Ziggy and Lindsay's answers to the secret questions over in Patreon. So please go and sponsor me at patreon.com/Hong Kong Confidential. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing this podcast. Thank you guys for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Over and out.
Over and out. Bye. Hi, confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.